Alrighty, and we're live. Welcome. Dr. Edward is the host of our Pet Anxiety Summit and our Holistic Anxiety Workshop. Welcome, Dr. Edward. Thank you so much again for your time.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. And the summit was awesome, and now we're getting all excited about getting ready to hopefully have a whole stack of people who are watching, listening, come along and spend 2 days with me learning all about how to prevent and treat and heal anxiety as holistically as possible.
I guess like for today, what we wanted to talk about is like when it comes to what makes your pet tick and like how can we um, prevent these things, and what are these early signs that are showing?
Yeah, it's a good thing to talk about. I think red flags of anxiety are, I think one of the big things is if you've got an animal that can't settle, that never switches off, that is hypervigilant, that just can't get into that nice, calm, steady, relaxed kind of state. This is often when I first see these animals, if they come in to see me, they're just kind of wired, and they can't get out of wired and into relaxed in an easy way. They kind of don't have a good capacity to self-soothe and self-calm and self-regulate. Cats, hiding a lot, and over grooming is probably a big one for cats too. Any over grooming in cats, but dogs, you got a hyperactive, hypervigilant dog that can never switch off, then that's often that early stages of anxiety. And I think the other thing to look out for with your pets is if any little thing happens and they kind of startle and get in even a little bit, that's something to be really aware of,
Yeah, and when you say like what makes your pets tick, like are there certain things that can really set them off, or things that that we need to be aware of that could possibly be a really big trigger for anxiety? And why is it such a common thing?
Um, well, why is it such a common thing? I think in a lot of ways, the way that we keep our pets is kind of artificial and confining and not how they would live in the wild. So we contain them. They don't have freedom. They don't have, particularly dogs, they don't live in a large social group of dogs, which is kind of their natural thing. So there's a few things there and I think the other thing is that humanity in general is under a lot of stress and pretty anxious. And that then affects the animals really strongly. If the humans have got a nervous system that's in this kind of chronic aroused, anxious, sensitized state, then the animals take their cue from that, and they tend to come into sync with the humans in a less than healthy way. When it comes to anxiety and triggers, is there one thing that triggers anxiety? I don't think so. I think anxiety is so complex and develops slowly over a time with often exposure to a lot of different triggers and a lot of different little events that all build on each other, and it affects the physiology, the nervous system, and the release of things like adrenaline and cortisol. Maybe a puppy has genetics that might predispose them to anxiety to begin with, and then maybe they don't get quite the level of socialization they needed to. Maybe they have a bad experience where another dog rushes them and rolls them over, and then maybe suddenly, um, maybe there was some kind of noise that happened at the same time then that they saw another dog, and they were worried that dog was going to rush at them, and then they start associating that particular sound with being the same fearful event. So they start to generalize this whole thing to other things, nearly always there's multiple triggers, there's multiple stimuli that affect these animals. Maybe this animal too then becomes overly dependent on the human to self-regulate and regulate their nervous system so that they, if they feel a bit anxious, they need to go to the human to feel like they can be okay. And then you get separation anxiety start to develop, and then it all builds and builds and builds and builds, and the human might be thinking, oh, well, my dog's got this little bit of anxiety, nothing to worry about. Oh, suddenly it's a little bit more, nothing to worry about. But then you cross a threshold where the anxiety-driven behaviors suddenly become really undesirable for the human, and the human suddenly thinks, oh, my pet's developed anxiety, I've got a problem. But the pet's been developing anxiety for months or years before it really becomes an issue that is a problem, and that's only then often that humans deal with it. And that's one of the big things that we want to cover in this workshop, is to get people proactive and really sensitive to the early signs of anxiety.
Yeah, and like we talk just when you started off answering that last question, you talk about the complexity of anxiety. Can we just kind of like what are the steps that the pet owners need to start take when it comes to understanding the complexity, and then once we start to understand the complexity and recognize potential signs, like how do we go about creating prevention strategies?
Well, I think the first thing is to become really, really good at listening to the non-verbal communication of your animals. Humans in general, because we're so verbal and we use language so much, often humans are really unconscious about body language and this kind of non-verbal communication, even though it's probably 60-70% of human communication is non-verbal.
It's even higher than that. Yeah, but
Yeah, but most people don't have any conscious awareness of all this massive
yeah.
amount of information that's being transmitted non-verbally.
Mm.
And that means that if you don't have conscious awareness of it, then you're not going to be able to start to read it in our animals. Now, animals' communication is probably 95 to 98% non-verbal. So one of the first things to do is to start really noticing the little changes in expression and tension in the ears, and body tension and breathing rate, and how your dog's moving, or all these other things, so that you can start to see the anxiety that you couldn't see before. Because until you can see what an animal is saying non-verbally, you're not going to pick up anxiety. So that's another thing that I'm going to talk quite a bit about in this workshop is, okay, how do you talk dog and talk cat and listen dog and listen cat in a way that you're really going to start to get very, very sensitive to the smallest little signs of increased arousal and anxiety in your pets.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's like anything, most of the time we're not present, and that's something that I'm
Oh,
very guilty of. Is I'm terrible with remembering people's names. It's just because I'm not present. It's like, oh, hi, how are you? Next person. Hi, how are you? Next person. And actually taking that time to, and I was out to dinner last night. I was sitting with a friend, well, a new friend, is one of my mates' friends, and the way that he was just so present with me, and I'm like, oh wow, I can really pick up on his presence, and it's something that just stuck in my mind. And when you're mentioning with our animals, a lot of these signs have been showing for us for such a long time, but we just weren't essentially present to what was going on. Is that an accurate kind of like
yeah,
description?
yeah. Look, I think presence is one of the key things that I work with when I'm working with animals. I'm actively wanting to be as present as I possibly can when I'm interacting with the animals, and the more that I bring awareness into my physical body, the more present I become. And there's something very interesting that I've noticed in that, is that when I become more present, animals nearby to me relax. And there is this thing that animals are very, very sensitive to this. And if you're not present, you're kind of dangerous in a way. You're
Mm.
dangerous to an animal if you're not totally present. So, yeah, I think presence is a big thing, and that also then has a whole lot of other flow-on effects in that. The human factor is something I'm gonna talk about in this workshop too, is that you, the human being,
Mhm.
you have to work on your self-regulatory capacity so that you can get into a nice, strong, resilient, healthy relaxation as much as possible, and ideally all of the time or most of the time. Because when you do that, your animals are very connected to you energetically and through watching your body language. And if they can see you're relaxed, they can go, oh, I can relax. It's safe. My human feels safe, so I can feel safe. So that has a really profound effect too.
And when it comes to creating prevention strategies, like what do you suggest as a way to like kind of like map this out when you're identifying, you're seeing it, now we need to create the strategies?
Well, then we go into this whole thing of a holistic anxiety treatment plan or prevention plan. If you have an animal that doesn't have anxiety, it's a great idea to get well ahead of the curve and have a treatment plan which is designed to keep your animal healthy rather than to fix a problem.
Yeah.
And what we go through then is you get very sensitive to the environment. So what kinds of things cause this fear, arousal, anxiety response in your animal? How can you avoid or minimize them? So you get really cunning and clever about, because every time you expose an animal to a stimulus that triggers an anxiety response, you're reinforcing the problem. You're making the problem worse. You're growing the anxiety, in other words. Now, you can't avoid all things, you can't tell the thunderstorm, "Oh, no, I don't want you to come here. I want you to go around over there 20 miles away so you don't disturb my dog." But then if you're gonna have some things that you can't minimize or remove the animal away from. Once you've and this is the 4 M's that we're gonna go through in detail on day 2 of the workshop. The first one is environmental awareness and management. Then the second one is behavior modification. Now, there's a couple of ways you can do that. You can do that with positive reinforcement training, where you do desensitization and counter conditioning, which you need to work with a high-level trainer, and you have to learn how to do positive reinforcement training, and you have to be structured, and you have to be careful, and you have to go little step by little step to get results, but it really works. Then the second way of behavior modification, which is a unique and innovative thing that I've created, which is using relaxing touch, relaxing body work, to use touch to move the whole body-mind system into relaxation. And this is something that if you come along the workshop, I'll be showing you how to do, and you'll be doing with your pets. And I found that if you do that every day, 10 or 15 minutes a day, and then do that also whenever your animals get triggered, you can get some really profound improvements in anxiety pretty damn quickly. So that's the first 2 M's. Then we have medication. Now, medication for me includes any kind of intervention that you're going to do, whether it's holistic, complementary, or more allopathic prescription medication type thing. So we're talking about, thunder shirts and energy healing and animal communication and maybe pheromones and even training and touch in a way. Even though I talked about that in the behavior modification, there's still intervention. So any kind of thing that you do with your animal, and if you try all the holistic things and they don't work, you're going to get better outcomes with some animals if you bring in prescription medication as well. And sometimes that'll be a short-term thing to help everything else stick better, and you'll cross a threshold and you might not need it. And you do get some animals, in my experience, that do better on long-term medication. And if you've got a vet with a really bad vet phobia, then they might need short-term situational medications to go to the vet so that they can be examined, they don't kill the vet, and things like that, right? So then you come to the 4th M, which is monitoring and evaluation. So you then need to have a structured way of introducing new things. If you introduce too many things new all at once, which one made a difference? Which one worked? Which one didn't? You can't tell. And then you're going to monitor and evaluate and try new things. And if they work, you'll integrate them. If they don't, you might not. And sometimes as the animals change over time, what did work stops working. So you might not need to use it anymore, and you might need to try different things. And it's an ongoing thing, it's almost like an ongoing mental, emotional self-care for your animals, that once you deal with the anxiety, you've got to ongoing be doing maintenance and care and attention And sometimes things go really well for a while, and then some unexpected event happens that sets your animal back a bit, and you've got to get a bit more active with your treatment and get stuck into things.
What's the difference between cats and dogs?
Well, in essence, the approach is the same.
Mm.
I mean, you do the same kind of framework. You experiment with the same kinds of treatments and all that sort of thing. I suppose one of the biggest difference with cats and dogs is that cats nearly always are contained in a home, and the and cats are more
So
independent than dogs.
we
You
just
know,
we just lost you there for a second. You the
that's right.
internet cut out.
I
What
saw
were you
that.
saying?
Well, with cats, and here's my cat on cue. Cats are more independent. You know, they don't have the same kind of social pack structure in the wild
Mm,
that dogs do. There is some things in the wild where cats will kind of come together in groups for short periods, and there'll be kind of interaction and social interaction, but generally they live on their own,
yeah,
and they come
okay.
together to make kittens, and then they don't, you know, the male cat doesn't participate in anything. If you're with wild dogs and packs, you've got the whole family group, and they all live together. So there's some kind of very deep behavioral differences, and I think cats often hide any kind of suffering a whole lot better than dogs.
Mm.
So cats with anxiety, you know, if they're running and hiding, we just dropped out again for a second there.
Yeah, it looks like Bali is doing its thing again. So
Mm,
apologize for people watching.
and this bandwidth thing.
Uh, yeah, we have that. So, what I like to like really get. What about people that with rescue animals? You always see, or you hear, "Hey, I rescued this animal and it's going through a lot of problems." Like, what do you recommend with people when they do actually want to get a rescue animal?
Well, the majority of rescue animals are going to come into your life with significant trauma that they've
Mm,
experienced, and trauma is like, if you have a big traumatic event, it's almost like you get a dose of anxiety that gets embedded into the system. It's stuck in the physicality and the emotions and the energy systems of the animal. And often then what happens is that there's a kind of suppression of the whole being, of their consciousness. A lot of their consciousness is just going to kind of being chewed up by that level of trauma that's in the body mind system. My experience is that when you work with rescue animals, a lot of them have anxiety, a lot of them have trauma. And when one of the interesting things that I've noticed about working with these kinds of animals is that a lot of people, you know, they might take 3 months or 6 months to kind of settle into the new home. And people think, well, you know, well, they've got a bit of anxiety and they're just, that's who they are. But I find often that when I get my hands on them and do body work, and we start to move the whole release patterns of trauma out of the system, and we start to get the nervous system regulating into relaxation, well, suddenly within a matter of weeks, the dog changes and they become more playful, they become more connected and interactive with humans. They become more vital and alive because the trauma, and, you know, I can speak a little bit from personal experience here because I was left after my second marriage with post-traumatic stress, and it really suppressed my whole life until I could integrate and assimilate it, and therapeutic touch is something that I found that really helps with these rescue animals that are traumatized and anxious, that you can see really big changes in them over time, because their whole nervous system has got jammed kind of onto a chronic anxiety, arousal, trauma response.
mm.
And if you use touch day after day, week after week, then their whole system slowly learns how to come into relaxation and let go and go, oh, then they got a whole lot more energy to be themselves with, and you meet a whole lot more of them.
I guess like consistency has to come into a big part of that. It's like, if you go to the gym and you get into really great shape and you're like, all right, cool, I've got there now. Don't need to keep going anymore.
Oh no, it doesn't work
It
like
doesn't
that.
work that way.
Well, I do physical exercise every week, and I
Mm,
notice that if I stop for 3 days, there's a loss.
yeah.
So it's like this with touch too. Now, the relaxing touch that I teach and that you'll be learning in the workshop, well, you touch your dogs and cats all the time already. So all you need to do then is learn some new qualities of touch and repurpose the time you're already having beautiful touch interactions with your animals anyway. So it's a no-brainer and a win-win for everybody.
Is there any like bad habits that pet owners can unintentionally uh, apply, or not unintentionally start working into their pets' lives? Not like with actually touch. Like I know I'm definitely guilty when I'd be sometimes playing with my puppy, maybe a little bit too aggressive with him, or
Yeah.
maybe even like too nurturing. Is like like a little kid that falls over and you're like, rather than just let it, it's like, you'll be fine, you're like, oh poor baby, you rush it, and then
Yeah.
you're yeah.
There can be elements of over-soothing and never allowing an animal to work through frustration or self-regulate, and then they become dependent on interaction and touch with a human. It's kind of like the only drug they have to help them regulate.
Mm,
And I think the biggest thing that people do is they do too much high arousal, high stimulation stuff with their dogs.
yeah.
Humans love razzing dogs up, making them excited, and everyone thinks, "Oh man, I've got to throw the ball for my dog for an hour a day, and it's really good for them." And it's not, especially with an anxious animal. One of the first things I say is, "Okay, we want to, only 5 minutes of kind of high intensity, high arousal play once or twice a day, and we're going to focus on a whole lot of relaxing, calm activities. We're going to do everything we can to keep this dog in a relaxed state, and everything we can do to keep them out of an aroused state is another big thing that I talk about when it comes to working with these anxious pets."
What about working dogs? Like working dogs that are no longer working dogs, but they're that breed and they're in a home. I guess people would want to think that, hey, I need to take this dog out running and exercising it every day. Are you saying the opposite?
Well, you want to be clever about it. Now, if you've got a working dog, the best working dogs, when they're working, they're focused and they're engaged, but they're grounded and they're sensible and they're totally responsive to communication from the person who's working with them.
Mm,
So I talk about arousal zones. You have the green zone, healthy relaxation, and I've just kind of evolved how I talk about it. And you have what I call the cool orange zone, where they're in heightened arousal and they're engaged with drive, but they're totally present and responsive. Then you get into hot orange. That's where they start losing their mind and getting crazy. And then they cross the red line and then they've lost their mind and they're dangerous to themselves and everybody. So you then have to be really, and this is another thing that we're going to talk about a lot in the workshop. And I probably should get you to pop the link in the chat for
yeah,
everybody so they can come
just
along
doing
and
that
join.
right now.
But yeah, it's that's another thing that you need to get really sensitive to with anxious animals. That you need to get really sensitive about where they are in their arousal spectrum and be managing that and being, if you feel like your animal's getting out of that cool orange and starting to escalate, you need to take some action to get them back down into a healthy zone.
Yeah, that's a really good answer too, and it took me a while to get to my point, but thank you for helping me along there.
That's all right.
I know we got to wrap up soon because you have another call to be on in 5 minutes. So let's, like anyone out there that is listening, if you have a quick question, that you'd like to answer, just pop it in the chat box, and we'll try and have Dr. Edward answer this question. So yeah, please jump in.
Yeah, and come and join us. You will not find a better value, high level workshop like this anywhere on the internet. It's going to be a lot of fun.
What was one of the reasons why you wanted to create a workshop like this, like for your own practice?
Well, because I want people to be able to help their animals be happier and healthier and have a good life without suffering. That's basically my whole motivation with everything I do with working with animals. And I really want to be able to teach people some of the relaxing touch stuff, which is incredibly powerful for making a difference for anxious animals.
And is there anything regarding like the gut and how that's related to anxiousness?
Well, the gut is a critically important part in terms of everything in any kind of illness, but particularly in anxiety. If there is gut issues, then it's going to be basically, if the gut is inflamed and out of balance, then through the vagus nerve, it's going to cause inflammation and imbalance in the brain and the neurotransmitters in the brain. So absolutely anything you can do to get the gut healthier is going to make a difference with anxiety.
Right. Yeah. That's something that I've learned a lot from our gut summit, and even though it was for pets, but even like relearning for that for myself, I'm like, yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense for my own issues. All right. Well, we haven't got any questions. So I'm going to put the link to the workshop in the Facebook group. If anyone has any questions and would like to know more, reach out to us at hello@petsummits.com. Just put that in the chat box now. Happy to answer any of your questions about this workshop. It's amazing. 2 days, goes for 4 hours each day. And Dr. Edward will be working and creating a plan for you. So this is something that we've worked and Dr. Edward's been working on for the last couple of years. Is like anything, you can do a 2-day workshop and then you just walk away and nothing. You get a little bit of information. We get a lot of information, but you're not able to implement it. So one of the big things is Dr. Edward is going to help you create a tailored plan for you for where you are with your animal and help you identify some of the identify what's causing the anxiety, and then implement prevention strategies. And then, and 3 weeks later, we're going to do a follow-up, because we realize that when anyone does any type of training, they're taking this information, and then 3 weeks from now, they may have forgotten something or there's been another change. So we want to have another 3 weeks later. We're going to be bringing everybody who has attended the workshop for a live session where we'll be troubleshooting anything that you didn't understand or some new things that have come up to help you work this through with your animal. So we would love for everybody that is having that does have an anxious pet, this is definitely the workshop for you.
Yep. It's going to be a stack of fun. You're going to get an incredible amount of value, and yeah, you'll be learning how to create and implement a holistic pet anxiety treatment plan as part of this whole thing. And right now we're going to say goodbye. So grab your seat in the workshop. We'll look forward to seeing you there, and I'll be doing everything I can to help you make a massive difference for your anxious pets.
All right. Thanks, guys. Thank you, Dr. Edward.
See you later.